Hey guys, welcome back to the stream. I'm just gonna make sure our sound quality is good. Awesome, awesome. Okay, so we've got some topics to talk about today, which I'm sure will be covered more extensively in later episodes, but I just wanted to get some of this information out there because it's patterns that I've been seeing repeating over and over again, whether it's dealing with the system or abusers or even in intelligence communities where people have infiltrated and are attempting to delay or distract the narrative and from information from getting out. So there's just some things I wanted to touch on today. So it's going to be a bit of a long stream. I have some notes here to go off of, which is good. If you see in the title there, we want to talk about psychopathy. Now, we understand that the nature of the world right now is we have some very not so good people in control and in power, and there's certain things that they do and behave and how they act that permeates through every bit of society. And I believe especially women or anyone who's been in an abusive relationship or has dealt with the system have a interesting perspective on these and really concrete evidence of the micro and macro and how this is operating. And once we get these patterns down, once we understand how these things operate, it's a lot easier to apply that understanding to multiple situations to get a better understanding of what we're experiencing or what we're witnessing in a lot of cases. So I wanted to start off with the ideas of mimicry in psychopathy. This is something when you're dealing with abusers, because they don't have the ability for normal emotional responses, they tend to become very good at mimicking other people's emotions, responses, information. There's a lot of copying that goes on, whether it's in a intellectual way where they're copying actual information that's being put out and putting their own name on it or perpetuating it as if it's their own. There's also emotional ways in where they can appear to be something they're not. This is significant to the world at large and these people and understanding it's all based on appearances, especially in certain family lines and networks that are groomed from a young age to play these parts later on. One of the first things they're taught is who they are in public is drastically different to who they are within the private sector of their own homes or their own networks or communities. So they have a drastically different public persona than they do a personal persona. But there are flags, it tends to bleed through into their public persona as well. But if you're not looking for the subtle details, you tend to explain it away. And they're very good at getting people to justify their own abusive behavior through that type of mentality where if you don't have a microscope, it's very easy to pass by some of the subtle hints of what's going on. So mimicry is a big one. If you find yourself talking to someone that you're, suspect of, and you hear them communicating with someone else and they're literally copying what you've said to them verbatim, with most normal people or people who have a conscience, when someone has taught them something, they internalize it. They find the lessons within themselves or what applies to them, and when they speak about it, it's from a personal perspective. But with psychopaths and manipulators, they don't have that internal process. So if they're trying to portray to someone else that they're an empathetic individual, say for one, they will copy what you've said verbatim because they're incapable of internalizing it. They don't have that, but they understand that when you did it, you elicit some sort of response out of someone, and they're attempting to elicit that same response, whether it be an emotional response, whether it be a sympathetic response, whether it be any type of response from another individual. They are very adept at watching and copying. It's kind of like there's been lots of movies done on it, like Mimic and things like that, where they're really showing you in plain sight how the psychology of their nature operates, and it's almost robotic in a way. And these are the red flags that you need to pay attention to. If you've never been around people like this, it's very stark compared to what you're used to. But if you've ever been in an abusive relationship, if you come from an abusive household, um, if somehow these attributes have been normalized to you, when you are encountered by them, they won't strike you as obvious as they would someone who hasn't been around it, because they can sense the coldness in it more so than someone who's been normalized to that type of behavior. Also significant is their ability to create flying monkeys. And a flying monkey, what it is manipulators, by and large, if they have a target, if there's someone that is a threat to them, they will intentionally communicate with those around them, triangulation, and spread lies and gossip and manipulation in order to discredit that person because they know something that they shouldn't know. And what they tend to do is go to these people, and they play a victim narrative, and it's not always so obvious that that's what they're doing, but it's what they're doing. They play a victim narrative where you have sympathy for that person, and then you paint them as the victim or the one who has been done wrong. And then you become the abuser for that person. But in your mind, you believe you're doing the right thing by defending this person, but you're not aware of the fact that they are the ones who are actually abusing. So now you've become a proxy abuser, the whole time feeling completely justified in your behavior. And later on, I'm going to get into why it's so important to not believe gossip, not believe things that you're being told, to research things on your own from all perspectives, all narratives, and to come to your own conclusions. It's laziness that tends to put you in a position where you become a proxy abuser. Gaslighting is also something that I wanted to mention because this is very common. From a have being abused perspective, you tend to, when you're with an abuser, you tend to justify their behaviors because psychologically you have to feel safe in your environment. And in order to do that, you have to kind of tell yourself that what you're witnessing, you're blowing out of proportion or you're not interpreting it correctly. So when these things come up, and works hand in hand with how they're able to isolate you from communities, because when things are not okay and you're seeking out help or you're talking to people about it, you make excuses for the abuser. All the while, the abuser is also having personal conversations with these people, making you out to be the bad guy. So if things ever do hit the fan and the truth starts to come out about the situation, or the abused person starts to understand what they're seeing, they're going to be completely isolated from their community. They especially go after family and friends, anybody who's close to the person who could offer some type of compassion or support in a time of need that would help keep them together when things aren't going so great. That's who they attract and who they purposefully, intentionally. It's kind of, when you start getting into it and you understand that this person's whole life is surrounded upon creating these scenarios where they're painted in a positive light. And anybody who's seen enough to disagree with that has absolutely no credibility. You take that perspective on the micro level of a singular person and you apply it to our governments at large, and it's the exact same thing. It's the exact same thing. And that's why I think these conversations are so important, because when you start to understand how it operates and how they manipulate, you can start to see the patterns and how it's playing out all around you. And through that, you can be a better advocate for those in your community, your family and friends who may be experiencing something that you need to take a stand against, whether it's court corruption, whether it's police corruption, whether it's child abuse, whether it's insane ideas being pushed by the society at large because of the infiltration that's happened into these subversive ideas to destroy the family unit and to destabilize an entire country. These things are happening, and it's going to keep happening. If we don't start coming together on a home scale, right now there is an awakening happening, I see, throughout the world. The problem is it's a lot of little individuals that are connecting online, which is great. You know, that's awesome. The problem is we can't really be effective in each other's lives. We can add that air of support when there may be none. But when it comes to your actual life and where you're at, we have to start building these same communities that we're experiencing online in our physical locations. What's some of the other, I wrote some stuff out here because I tend to go off on tangents, and I apologize for that. It's due to the post-traumatic stress disorder, so I'm doing my best to keep online here. The flying monkeys, that was important, because the people who become these monkeys, in a lot of ways, not all of them, but a lot of them actually believe they're doing the right thing, and they haven't done enough work to see the situation for what it is, to not understand that they're actually now become the abuser, and they're the ones perpetuating the gaslighting. That was right. So gaslighting is a tactic where they have you not believe the world around you. They have you doubt your own gut instincts, your own interpretations, your own feelings or understandings about something, to the point where you can no longer see what's going on around you, and they can just feed you a narrative. And the narrative is where you start getting into playing their game. You're playing their program. They've designed it for you, and you're enacting it through ignorance. Just reading some of the comments here. Sorry, I'm not very good at multitasking anymore. Thanks for being here today, guys. I really appreciate it. Isolation, that's another key, is you have to isolate the victim. The more support they have, the easier it is for them to find resolution in this situation, and that's not something they want the abuser, whoever's playing that role in this particular situation. They want you weak. They want you weak. They want you alone, so they can keep throwing things to destabilize you, because that's the other thing. They need you reacting on an emotional basis, not through logic, not through reasoning, not through a well thought intention. They need you reacting, not acting intelligently, because then they can gauge where you're going to go and step a few steps ahead, because they have to be so many steps ahead. It's got to be absolutely exhausting trying to keep up with this type of behavior. And that's why it's so important that you get to understand what it looks like, so you can see the subtleties, because there will always be subtleties. There will always be those little slips. You can't keep up this type of a framework without having those, and it is subtle. But the problem we're having today is that it's been enacted on such a large scale that it's normal. So when you start to see it in your own life, it doesn't have the same weight, and it doesn't bring as much flags or attention to yourself as it should, because it has been normalized so much so. There's also a level of wizardry to this, especially like we're talking about some of the lower levels, but when you get into some of the higher levels of the people who are using these tactics to manipulate, they're adept at magic. They're adept at manipulating ideas and understanding to fit a narrative. There's quite a bit of wizardry, and even on a spiritual level, I believe we'll definitely go into that kind of stuff at a later time. I just want to kind of give a basic understanding. This is going to be a long enough talk as it is. But there's a lot of wizardry that goes on, and you have to understand the language that's being used, and if somebody's repeating something constantly, even if they're rechanging the words or changing it around, if it's something that they're trying to drive home, that tends to spell that something else is going on here. And the triangulation is really important. This is definitely now getting into the shill tactics as well. Divide and conquer. And I experienced this through different groups that are activist groups that tend to, want to do the right thing, but they're easily infiltrated due to people's lack of personal responsibility and understanding. And what these agents will do, whether they're trained agents, paid agents, or just people who aren't in the spirit of God that are acting as agents for the enemy, they will get into a group. They'll look for personal conversations. They'll look for weak points. Lonely people, people who are looking for attention, people who haven't done their own research that tend to believe anything they're being told. And they build these personal relationships with them largely on fraudulent information. And it's through those personal relationships and eliciting emotional responses from you, whether it be sympathy, whether it be compassion, you tend to build that bond. And like somebody mentioned in the comments, it's Stockholm syndrome. You're absolutely correct. It's that way of building a false bond so the people are reacting in an emotional state and not through logic. It's through an internalized process of sympathetic energy than it is through an actual thought process of what is this person's true intention, what are they looking for. And that's a really important question to ask yourself. Who's benefiting? What would be the outcome of perpetuating this information? Who would be in the right, or who would be benefiting from that situation? And you can start to put a picture together, because they're very good at obfuscation and not dancing around the true issue, so you can't really see what their purpose is. But it can be broken down pretty easily if you ask yourself some very significant questions about what you're seeing. So yeah, we have isolation, the lies, division. Yes, so that's what I was saying, is they get in there, they divide, and then they triangulate. So they convince you of a certain understanding, and then they use you to communicate with a third party. So it's not only do they have the telephone effect working for them, where things get manipulated, but now they're also using the monkey, the flying monkey attempt, where you've become the face of their message. And this is going to be a hard one for people to understand, because they've identified with it so hardly. It takes a level of personal accountability and responsibility to realize that they are now perpetuating the lies that they've been told. They have become the abuser. It's going to take a lot of personal introspection to really come to that conclusion of what you're looking at. the, too much of this stuff is perpetuated because people are incapable at this present point in time of truly looking inside and coming to terms with who and what they are, um, and trying to be better people and being brutally honest with themselves. Because as long as you have those blank spots within yourself where you're not really taking accountability, they will be exploited. They'll be exploited and they'll be manipulated for someone else's agenda. And that could be a myriad of people. The list goes on today, on and on and on. So let's see here. What else did we get into? The isolation, that's huge. The sickly sweet behaviors. This is really key. This was something that I heard repeated over and over again by very high level manipulators. And it's this understanding and this idea of kindness, to always be kind, which on face value is a beautiful idea. Now, if somebody's using that idea as a way for them not to be responsible for their unkind behaviors and not be responsible for abusing another individual. So this is how this works, right? So I'm a jerk and I treat you like shit and I get you to a point where you're very angry at me because you're sick of it. You know, you've had enough. Now you stand up for yourself and said, this is not okay. I'm not okay with this type of behavior. You need to stop. Then they turn around and say, oh, you're not being very kind. You need to be kind. And you're seeing this play out all over the world where people aren't having to be responsible for their behavior through this understanding of tolerance and kindness, which is absolutely ridiculous. It's just a way of obfuscating the issue, the real issue, and to allow adults mainly to act like children. We wouldn't, good-natured people would not allow our children to act in these behaviors. And yet, through tolerance, we're expected to allow adults to perpetuate these types of behaviors. And I think we're all getting a little sick of it. Like we're getting to a point where we need leaders in this world to put their foot down, you know, like daddy who's had enough and said, no, it's time out time. Like go think about your actions and come back and talk to me about how you've participated in this. And until then, go hang out in your room for a while. It's time to, you know, really start to put our foot down because we are allowing these behaviors to perpetuate. The triangulation is important. The sickly sweet behaviors, so that's what I was getting at, and that has a lot to do with the two-face. You know, they if someone is constantly complimenting you, if someone is constantly putting you up on a pedestal, if somebody is constantly, ask yourself, what do they want? What is their true intention? Normal people, okay, yeah, we give out compliments. You know, when we see something, but if somebody's really driving it home in a way that just makes you feel uncomfortable, there's something else is going on. That person is not who they are perpetuating or making themselves appear to be. There's something else happening, and that's a time to really be aware, really aware, especially if you're in a relationship. And in your relationship you are doing something together that may be involved in something, these manipulators will intentionally look at the partner and they will attempt to build a relationship with that partner in an effort to triangulate to get at, you know, who may be actually being the person who's doing more to bring truth about, or whatever it is that they're involved in. I don't want to paint any specific pictures because these are generalities. We have to start understanding the patterns and seeing how these things are working so we can start to catch it off at the pass, because things are not looking good in the world. And I'm not trying to be a downer. We need to get realistic about how these things have perpetuated so that we can start to build a better world. or we're going to end up in the exact same position we're in right now. It's already happening. I can see it happening in other groups where, they talk about how they don't like the top down understanding of these elites being the ruling class, and yet they present an idea where they are now the ruling class. They get to be the top, and you're not the top. So they're not teaching true sovereignty. They're not teaching true understanding. They're just teaching a watered down version of what we already have. You have to be very aware of that. I see a lot of people being manipulated right now on the basis that somebody's singing a very pretty tune, but when it comes down to the actual actions of those individuals, they don't match up. There's what a person says and what a person does are two different things, and I'm going to get more into that in a later conversation with one of the friends that I talked to, specifically around religious understandings, because we're seeing patterns erupt around, dogmatic individuals who push narratives, but then you apply it to what they're actually doing, and it's a lot of judgment, it's a lot of fear porn. It's this idea of a public persona and a personal persona, and not having the courage to look within and to take that personal responsibility and that accountability. It's so essential. So many of these ideas, they all connect together. And that's why it's so important, I think, to talk about these things at this point, because this is where we're at. And until we can get to a point where we're taking personal responsibility and accountability for the part that we're playing in what we're seeing play out in the world, it's not going to change. And those blind spots will always be manipulated and exploited. Some of the other things that you're going to see in manipulators is narcissistic rage and projection. When you attempt to call them on what they're doing, if you have an idea that may be contrary to something they're putting out that you believe may help them, or that you don't totally agree with, they rage. They lose their minds. They're triggered. I guess you could call that the NPC liberal trigger. There's all kinds of memes for it right now, but it's again pattern. Projection. These people will accuse everyone around them of doing the very things that they're doing, and if you think about it psychologically, you can figure out how it works. Because if I'm guilty of something and I'm accusing everyone else around me that's guilty of it, if it comes to light that I'm doing this thing, the first thing that's going to go through those people's minds is, well, they were talking about this person doing it, so they couldn't possibly be doing it. And that's something that's happening on a subconscious level, even because if you actually sit there and think about it, you're like, wait a minute, that's some pretty high level wizardry stuff going on there. But if you're not thinking about it and you're just like most people going through day-to-day life, just trying to get things done, not having time for things, it's happening on a subconscious level where you're automatically associating that person with a disgust of that type of behavior or whatever it may be, which makes it harder for you to see the truth, and which is why it's so important to internalize and to really review these things on your own, and don't take other people's understandings. It's gold. Like anything I say on this channel, please do not, go do your own research, go look into it. That's all I'm trying to do here is bring information forward. And if there's a subject or a matter that you want to research more, you can definitely ask me where I got that information from. If it's psychology and court and things like that, like law, those things I've been going over a lot more lately. So where these things are coming from and where I'm learning from, definitely it'll be a lot easier to recover and help you on your journey. But I'll do the best that I can to provide you information. And if you're finding yourself in a group of people and they're perpetuating certain information, and when you ask to be able to do further research, they won't give it to you, red flag, because that means what's happening right now, especially with the truth community, I see because a lot of people are doing research and they're coming to pretty profound conclusions. And there's information coming out that I don't think has been out ever, if not for a very long time. And they take that information and they weaponize it against other people. So they get to a certain understanding and then they hoard it and they pretend like they're the end all to be all. And they hoard it over other people as if they have, because information is power. Okay. And I think that's a huge point right now. And I'm seeing that happen a lot. Personally, I believe that in God's teachings, if you're in alignment, if you are given a certain understanding, not only is it your responsibility, but it's your duty to share that with other people. It's your duty to bring that information forward for other people's advancement as well. And to have these groups that I'm seeing find certain information, put themselves on a pedestal, and then require you to go through them to get to the information, while asking you to pay for your own journey, should send up a lot of red flags to a lot of people. But we're at a point where we need people to really start looking into these things for themselves. And if they're not, then they're going to be manipulated. They're going to be cotton picked to be flying monkeys. So narcissistic rage and projection. Projection's a huge one. It's and this was one of the things I really wanted to focus on today, and I think it's one of the more profound understandings when you start getting into it, is the nature of mirrors, the nature of consciousness, and this world we see around us, and how effectively it works as a mirror. When you've done your internal processing, and it's not like you just do it and it's over. This is a lifelong thing that you have to do. You have to constantly be getting better. But there is a point when you take responsibility for yourself, when you take personal accountability, when you start to build that inner relationship with your own creator and your own understanding, and that the world around you shifts and you're able to see things for what they are. But until you get to that point, the world is nothing but a projection of your own inner turmoil. So no matter who's in front of you, no matter what information you're looking at, it's always going to be a mirrored reflection of yourself. And until you learn those lessons that are in those mirrored reflections, until you can internalize that information, you will never see what you're looking at for what it is. You'll only see what you're looking at for what you are. And that's how a lot of this has been perpetuated. And because we're living in a hall of mirrors. And until you can look yourself in the eyes clearly, you're just going down the hall. And I think that's really important, is the accountability, the focus, the personal responsibility, and coming to terms with these things within yourself. The mistakes that you've made, asking forgiveness for that, forgiving yourself for that, and strive to do better. Because until you get to that point, you're going to constantly be judging others for their experience. You're going to be constantly pointing fingers and jumping to conclusions, and you won't be able to see the manipulative dramas going on around you. And that's why these shills and these manipulators are so good at what they do, because they understand that you don't actually see them. So as long as they paint a mirror in a perspective that you want to see yourself, they have you hook, line, and sinker for the rest of your life. And that's what they do. They paint an image and a persona that you want to see, because they're masters at having a public image, as opposed to the private image that they live with. The emotional response victim narrative, I think that's pretty important too. When you're having a personal connection with somebody and they're just constantly feeding you reasons why they've been hard done by, or reasons why. That was something I experienced in a personal relationship with a psychopath. And they understand, they have like a radar for good people and for sympathetic, honest people, especially intelligent people. Like if you're, somebody who's been used by an abuser and you think, how the heck could I fall for that? Please look into it, and you'll understand that some of the most intelligent, kind human beings get used. It's not that you're stupid. In fact, it's the very opposite, because that makes you, it makes you a challenge, and they like that. They really like that. But definitely, they know how to find sympathetic individuals. They know how to find good-natured individuals. They know how to find people um, that want to fight for other people, and they will use victim mentality, um, poor me scenarios to have you become their talking head. We really have to look at what a person is doing and not what they're saying, because what they're saying and who they are could be two totally different things. And we really have to start looking for the details and the perceptions, and the red flags, and where these things are coming from. And the sad part is the controllers and the people kind of at the very top, they know exactly what they're doing. But the people at the bottom, the NPCs, they have no clue. They're nothing but a subconscious. That's why I like the NPC understanding, because it really kind of paints a picture of the subconscious reaction. There's the thing going around, facts not feelings, because they're running on that emotional response to get you to do what they want you to do. And you think that you're the one in control and doing this. You're not. You're not. You're doing exactly what they want you to do. So I think it's really important to look at those issues, and I definitely want to get into this more in the future, and it will come up. I think that's I'm just going to have a look here of what we went over. Yeah, the repeating things multiple times, form of brainwashing, becoming that, the triangulation. If you want to look some of this stuff up for yourself, I think it would be really important to the mimicry, flying monkeys, gaslighting, triangulation. Please, please educate yourself, please, because the more we can start to become responsibly effective in our own lives, the more effect we can have on the world around us. And this is essential. This is absolutely essential right now, because it's not going to get easier. It's not going to get better until people start standing up and really taking responsibility for the world around them. So I just want to thank you for tuning in today. If you enjoy this type of information, if you feel the need or the ability, if you could contribute to the channel, I would really appreciate it. And we'll keep going from here. Soon I'm working on a religious conversation with this friend of mine with some of the patterns we're seeing repeating, and we have really great personal conversations. So we're going to attempt to bring that type of environment here, where we're just speaking frankly and bringing information forth. So that should be in the near future. And we got other things in store. So thanks for joining us here, and you guys have a great evening. Thank you.